This lesson is a compilation of all the important lessons related to the schwa sound. In order to do this properly and make sure you have everything you need, we're going to first look at the original schwa lesson so you have all the basic information. Then we're going to look at the basic mouth posture settings, because these settings are what allow us to naturally and effortlessly create the American English schwa, which is our relaxed neutral sound when we're not making any particular sound, such as E or S. It's also the reason why the schwa is the most common sound, as well as the most common reduction. Without these mouth posture settings, you'll be fighting your native language's mouth posture settings, which makes it a lot more difficult to get the sound and or the correct quality. After the settings, we're going to look at the actual schwa lessons, including the truth about the schwa and how it actually works as a range in American English, something that you probably haven't heard from any other teacher. Many important details are scattered throughout these videos, which is part of why I'm making this compilation, so make sure you watch until the end so that you don't miss anything. There are also a couple of ear training lessons, which are going to be linked in the description. Now, here on the vowel chart, we actually have two symbols for this sound. And let's get that out of the way first. The schwa sound is the upside down E letter. Next to that is an upside down V letter. Now, specifically, only the upside down E is actually the schwa. However, the other sound is the same sound, at least in English. The only real difference between them isn't in the sound, it's in the stress. However, because both of these symbols in English represent the same sound, I refer to any word that uses either of these symbols as the schwa. But it doesn't matter because it's the same sound. We want to focus on training our ear to hear the stress, and if a word uses one of these two symbols, if it's stressed, then it will be louder and longer. If it's not stressed, it will be shorter and quieter. That's the main thing that we want to focus on here. Okay, now that that is out of the way, how do we make this sound? So as we see on the chart, this sound is in the middle of the mouth going from front to back. So you're going to use the middle of your tongue and in here. And we also see that top to bottom, it's in the middle section. So we don't want the mouth to be really open like ah or ah, and we don't want the mouth to be really closed like e or oo. What we want to do is open the mouth part way, very similar to the position for eh, that third vowel sound in the front of the mouth. Now, there are different ways that you can approach trying to find this sound. Many English teachers simply tell you to relax your tongue and you're done. But for a native English speaker, yes, the tongue does feel pretty relaxed. In my classes with my students, I've noticed that when I tell them that, many of them can't produce the proper sound. The next thing we want to mention really quick is a very big common mistake that many English learners make when trying to find this sound. I've had many students who will either open their mouth too much, so their tongue is kind of more like this, or even if their mouth isn't open too much, their tongue inside kind of comes down too much, like they're pushing down on the front. And this gets us a lot closer to the ah sound that is in many other languages as the a. And we don't want to do that. So be very careful that when you try to make the schwa, it doesn't start to slide forward, because that's a very common thing that happens with many of my students. Make sure you get it up here in the middle. Next, let's move on to some example words and common spelling patterns. One of the most common ways to spell the schwa sound is with the letter U. Now, of course, this letter can represent other sounds, such as the U sound. So, unlike the front vowels, when we start talking about these other vowel sounds, the spelling patterns become a little less reliable. Let's look at some examples that use the letter U. But, cut, duck, luck, run, fun, up, and cup. Another spelling pattern that is also kind of common is with the letter O, done, one, money, first syllable, month, some, come, from, love, and of course, the preposition of, which is very commonly mispronounced. It's spelled with the letter O and the letter F, but there's no O, there's no F. It's a schwa sound plus a V sound. Now, the bad news, any vowel letter, A, E, I, O, U, can represent the schwa sound. Again, this is why we want to train your ear and not rely on the spelling patterns. Now this looks messy, but don't worry. We'll be covering every point. Note that this image is approximate, but it is based on research and how things feel in my mouth as a native speaker. And we're going to be talking about the settings for different parts of the vocal tract, meaning what you have to hold in place more or less at all times, regardless of what sound you're producing. Now you already do this in your native language, but you just have to adjust each setting as needed for American English. Let's very briefly talk about the jaw setting. Now the jaw needs to be open enough for us to have enough space to work with. However, keep in mind that the jaw is not the most important thing when it comes to space in the mouth, and just because your jaw is open enough does not mean that you have enough space. It's just the first step, and there are a few other things that you also have to change. Now, one thing that has a huge impact on the space in the mouth, especially back here, is the soft palate setting. Now, the soft palate, or the velum, is that part of your mouth up in the back that will open and close to help produce nasal sounds. But here we're talking about the default height and tension settings, not what we need for a particular sound. We breathe more in American English, which you probably know, but it turns out that this actually helps to lift and hold up that soft palate, and that actually might be a big part of the reason why we tend to hold it higher. Now, super quick on the throat setting. So I've talked about the throat before, so we're not going to go into all the details here, but the throat is generally open and relaxed, especially on the top. This top area is usually what causes the problem for people learning American English. You do not want to pinch the sides up here. It seems that in order to help support this sort of higher, tighter top of the throat area, which also helps maybe push the tongue forward more, they tend to pinch in from the sides. And so if you can try to not just relax and open out sort of this way, but also this way, right? See if you can sort of tighten and release, tighten and release. Now there are two ways that you can hold the tongue in the mouth, two parameters, right? Or details. There's high versus low, so up and down. There's forward and back. Now, based on my own experience and what I've seen in the scientific research, American English seems to be one of the lowest and farthest back languages. And this means that the tongue is constantly held very low in the mouth, sort of like it's sinking into the jaw. And this allows us to have tons of space up above the tongue. And in addition, the whole tongue is held constantly back a bit. It's constantly pulled back. Now, by constantly, of course, I mean the setting. If your language holds the tongue up here and makes all the sounds, right? Front sometimes comes up for a sound, the back sometimes comes up for a sound, that's fine. But the tongue is generally held at a higher height. English, or American English, does the same thing, except we hold our tongue down here. That's why we have more space regardless of what sound you're making. Now this is actually the single biggest reason why you have trouble making certain sounds, especially the schwa sound. So for the back of the tongue, the default position, the setting, of course, we want it low and back, just like the whole rest of the tongue. But don't go so far back that you block the throat. The back of the tongue is a little extra special and important because it can push the whole tongue forward, or you can just have a forward tension in it. Same thing, you can sort of pull the whole tongue back, or you can kind of have a backward tension in it. And we don't want that forward or backward tension necessarily. You don't want to block the throat. That's the big thing. Right? You don't want to do the sounds in the throat. You don't want to block the throat. Again, it should feel like it's sinking down and back into the jaw as it hangs off the hinge. That's going to be a very key important detail that I haven't talked about yet. And we're going to see that in a second when we talk about the middle of the tongue. So the center of gravity, I've talked about that in the phase 1 lesson and how to set that up and how that feels and what it is and blah, 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 blah. Go check that out. It's basically the schwa sound. Note that the middle of the tongue, again, is low and back. Okay, that's our default position. With the exception of R, no matter what sound you're making, this space in the middle will more or less be maintained during all of speech. When I'm speaking to you right now, if I pay attention, it feels like all the sounds that I'm making, except for the R, are sort of moving around this center point. That's the center of gravity. So if I'm doing the E, I feel space here. The E does its thing. We're going to talk about that with the front of the tongue. Even though the front is high, the middle doesn't come up too. Okay, I keep that space. If I do ooh, that comes up, I still have the space. Now the hinge, there's this hinge thing. You can probably see my door frame there, right? We call that the hinge. Well, we actually have that inside the American English mouth. Hinge is there, and then you just like a door, it just lifts up. You're gonna count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now this you can't really see as well on the map because it's a side view. You'd have to see it like more from the back, like looking in from the back of your head, so you can maybe imagine that. The body of the tongue is low. This is low, this is low, this is low. But the sides of the tongue, particularly in the middle sides, are going to slightly raise. You don't want to do this. Okay, that's too much. They're going to slightly raise. Don't worry about touching the bottom. If you imagine that there's say like, okay, this is the side, right? Then this is like the bottom side, and this is like the top side. So it's like a corner almost. Now you want to take that top corner, the top side, on both sides of your tongue, in the middle. You're going to lift slightly, and you're trying to touch on that 5th tooth. This would be the inside of your teeth right here. This would be the bottom of the top teeth. Okay. And this is the corner. So you want the corner of, like the upper corner of the side of your tongue to touch the upper corner of your 5th tooth. You have to have that. There are some sounds that can break that, and we're going to see what sounds do that. But most sounds will have that hinge. If you do not have the hinge in place for most sounds in American English, they will not sound right. It is a core part of the accent. Now, the front of the tongue, the default position, right? We know that the tongue needs to be low, it needs to be back. What does that mean for the front? Of course, it's going to be low. If you are not using the front of the tongue for a sound, like the E or the T or whatever, so you do a K, you do an whatever, with the exception of maybe the R, you're going to keep this low. There's this teeth line. Okay. You do not want to be above that teeth line. So you don't want to be holding your tongue up here. You want it to just sort of sink down. Now, you're not trying to push it and hold it way down here. Okay, it can really be anywhere, as long as it's below that teeth line, it could be anywhere in here. It doesn't matter. You want it to just sort of rest there, to sort of hang out. So that's the height. Now, we know everything else is low as well. But what about that backness? Now, in the research, I did find that say for example in French, they'll actually because the tongue is pushed forward, the front of the tongue will actually be like very firmly on here, like they're sort of pushing into these teeth here. I don't know if that applies to all French speakers. That's just what I found in the research. Talking to some Spanish speakers, they say that the tip of their tongue is lifted and it's kind of hanging here, but it is kind of like, it's not away from the teeth, so it's still kind of really close to the teeth. So again, because Spanish is pushed forward. What English is supposed to do by default, based on the research, is you're supposed to be pulled back from the teeth. Because if the whole tongue is pulled back, then that will actually mean that you're not touching the teeth. Okay, so you should be low and back. So you should have a space here. And that's fine. If you do that, you will sound great. In my experience, as I've said in some live streams before, I can anchor the front of my tongue right here. Now, I'm not pushing really, really hard. I'm kind of maybe just stretching the front a little bit. right? Stretching it out a little bit because everything is low and back. I'm not trying to push it from here, right? So I'll maybe stretch a little bit to get a nice, good, solid anchor here, and I'll do E, A, Ah. Right? I could do pretty much all vowels without moving the front of my tongue from that spot. So you don't absolutely have to have the front of the tongue not touching the teeth. But if you do, you're probably going to have to stretch this a little forward because you want the rest to be down and back. So that might be a hack for you. There's different ways to approach this, whatever it is. But the simple, easy default thing that I recommend for most people to do is just to go ahead and let the whole tongue kind of come down and back. You're not touching the teeth, and you stay low. Now this is interesting because there's the tip of the tongue, there's the blade of the tongue. This is called the tip blade system. And this is actually very important between different postures, okay? Because the tip and blade system will sort of be lined up or used slightly differently in different languages or based on their posture. Now, what you want for English, you want that tip blade, not necessarily the tip itself, right? Not the tip going straight up, but this sort of tip blade, this front of the tongue, you should have it lined up roughly, doesn't have to be perfect, but roughly under the bump. You don't want it to be lined up here. You should be able to go straight up onto the bump. Relax everything. I have 4 tips that are going to go into detail with what I mean by that. Remember that your posture feels relaxed to you in your native language, but if you cannot do the dead tongue sound from phase 0, then you are not relaxed enough. A quick clarification. I've said before that you should not completely relax because American English isn't 100% relaxed. That's still true. The problem is that even though learners try to relax more and more and more, they still don't reach that level of relaxedness we need for American English. So when I say relax everything, I'm simply emphasizing the fact that you need to relax a lot more than you think you have to. The dead tongue sound in phase 0 is the starting reference. Then you add just that little bit of tension we need to get and hold the American posture settings, including the center of gravity. And remember, the sounds also are generally pretty relaxed. Tip number 1, don't raise the middle sides steeply. The maps that you'll see emphasize the tongue lowness setting and the center of gravity, based on how they feel in my mouth. But many students overdo this by trying to keep the sides way too high. This can easily bring in way too much tension as well as just make you sound weird. You simply need the middle sides to be a little higher than the middle body. Remember that the mouth is pretty small, so what we see on the maps actually isn't that steep. In fact, it might help to look at it this way. Keep the middle sides touching the upper teeth lightly, but then try to feel that the middle body is lower than the sides through relaxation, instead of trying to force the middle body down or force the sides up. The next tips will help you do that. Tip number 2, don't tense the middle sides. Just because they're higher than the middle body does not mean you need to hold a whole bunch of extra tension in them. At first, this is normal, but as you practice, try to keep that contact as light as possible. Also, make sure that you aren't pushing into the teeth and that you're not pushing between the teeth. A little tiny bit is okay, maybe about 1/4 or 1/5 of the way through. This relaxation also includes the width of the tongue. So you should let the tongue relax inward, not trying to pull it in or tense it in. And you should feel that the middle body will sort of sink down in between the bottom teeth into the jaw. Tip number 3, remove as much tension as you can from the entire tongue. Thanks to the insight from a subscriber, I recently discovered something interesting. If I tense my whole tongue, especially the middle and all of the sides, it naturally raises the tongue up a little bit and helps me get the Spanish center of gravity much more easily. However, I still feel my native center of gravity in the back middle of the tongue, but now it's like a very tight, small, heavy ball. So just getting the tension of the tongue tenser or more relaxed will not necessarily fix the center of gravity itself, but everyone hits a wall that they can't relax past. so you have to get feedback on this. Recording yourself and comparing it to me might be enough, but for many people, they need the guidance of another person. Tip number 4, get your tongue even lower. Another big issue is that many people don't let the tongue relax down low enough, or it keeps getting stuck in a higher, more tense position as they speak. This is especially true for the back of the tongue. In order to do this properly and make sure that you can get enough space in the mouth, you have to actually address the throat setting and remove any extra tension here at the top and let your voice fall downward. There's a special lesson for that coming up. However, just fixing that won't guarantee that your tongue is low enough. So as you practice and get more feedback, you want to pay attention to both details. Next, there are 2 special exercises to help with relaxing, and one will also help you find that center of gravity better. Exercise 1, relax and follow the line. You'll need another person for this exercise. They should either be a native or at least be able to hear like a native. For best results, you'll need someone like me who can actually hear the posture settings. First, find your native language's center of gravity. For many languages, this seems to be the E sound, and this exercise is specifically designed to be used with that sound. Note where the sides of the middle of the tongue are when you're doing this in your native posture. If you don't naturally touch the upper teeth like we described before, then make sure that you at least try to touch the upper teeth, but do not worry about trying to get the sides higher than the middle body. Most likely in your language, the sides and the body are going to be more flat and even, or you might actually have the middle body be a little higher. The most important thing here is that most likely in your language, you hold extra tension through the entire tongue, and that's the thing that we're trying to remove. Start making the E sound in your language like you normally would. As you're doing this, start trying to relax the entire tongue, as well as the top of the throat, and especially try to remove any tension from the middle sides. But keep the sides where they are. Don't let them come off the teeth. If you do it right, the middle body will naturally sink lower than the middle sides as it goes down more into the jaw between the bottom teeth. Now this might be enough to produce the center of gravity in American English. First, the person who's listening to you should tell you if you sound more open and relaxed, regardless of what sound you're actually making. But if you're not sounding more open and relaxed, stay with this step until you can remove as much tension as possible. If you do sound more open and relaxed, but you're still not making the sound, go to the next step. From there, look at this map. The E is somewhere around here. The other person will point to that spot, either with a finger or a mouse if using the computer. Keep things relaxed, but try to move the sound that you're making into that sound. Make sure that you let the front of the tongue fall and relax down as you do that. That's a common mistake. Now, the person will listen to you as you try to shift into that sound, and they will either point using their finger or the mouse to move along the map as you get closer and closer. This gives you direct visual feedback based on what you're doing, using the person's ears to guide you. For example, Now one common problem is passing right over that and ending up somewhere in ah or like ah if your throat is tight. Also make sure to avoid your native language's ah sound, which most likely means that you're either letting the middle of the tongue, especially in the front middle, come down too low, or you're maybe opening the jaw too low as you shift, and or you're letting the back of the tongue either stay too high or come up as you try to do that. Again, that can also be tied with the top of the throat tensing. And don't forget to relax those middle sides while still keeping light contact with the upper teeth. The lesson on voice placement will help you relax and open up that top of the throat, so check that out if you get stuck. If you've been learning English for a while, you probably know about a little sound called the schwa. You also probably know that many teachers say that the schwa and another sound, the upside down V in IPA, are the same sound. But why? Especially if you can hear a difference. What's really going on here? First, we need to talk about the range and quality of sounds in English. Now, first let's define our terms. A range would be some sort of value from point A to point B. So this could be on a scale of 1 to 10, there's a range of value. Now, when I talk about quality, I'm not talking about what some other teachers talk about with like where the sound comes from in the chest or in the throat. I'm talking about how clearly or not clearly and how quickly or slowly a particular sound is pronounced in the flow of speech. So let's take a very, very quick look at the S sound and just stay with me for a second because it's definitely worth it. So if we put S into a range, on one side we have the fully enunciated, very clear, perfect S sound in English. So there's a lot of force, lots of good air. There's a whistle sound because of the position. S. Okay, and the length isn't too short, right? It's a good solid sound. S. So if I say so, okay, I'm very clearly enunciating that word and each sound in the word. Now, what happens if I say the S a little bit faster? So. It still sounds really good. It still sounds like an S. It's a little bit shorter, which because we don't have quite as much time to hear the sound, it is a little less enunciated, a little less clear, but there's no problem, right? Now, what happens instead of the speed if I say the S kind of in a lazy way? Maybe I don't get completely into the S position and I say it more like s, s, instead of s, 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 s. So. Whether we increase the speed and or especially the laziness or the lowering accuracy of the position, we move from more clearly enunciated to less clearly enunciated. And this is the range of the S sound. Now, because of how the S sound works, there's not really much difference in this range, and so it doesn't really matter as long as you have a clear enough S sound. Obviously, the opposite extreme of fully enunciated and clearly pronounced would be no sound, where we drop a sound and it disappears. Now, you cannot just drop whatever sound you want. There are some sounds, like the T sound, that can be dropped in some cases under certain circumstances. And so that is part of the flow of American English speech. How does this apply to the schwa? Well, it's actually very simple. These two symbols, the upside down E in IPA and the upside down V in IPA, although technically they are not the exact same sound, they are actually the same sound. And I know that sounds weird. They're really two different qualities of the same sound. So what do I mean by that? Well, the upside down V, like in the word other, okay? That is a nice open, okay, a little bit lower down. It's a nice open sound. It sounds very similar to what we call the schwa, but it's very clearly enunciated. And that would be on this end of the range, where it's a fully enunciated, clear sound. Other. Now, what happens if I try to say other, but I start speaking either really quickly or I get a little lazy with the sound and maybe I don't open my mouth as much? Other, the other day, the other. It actually is a schwa sound. And you might be saying, well, it's a reduction. Hold that thought. We're going to come back to reductions for the schwa in a second. But what happens if we go the other way? What happens if we take a word like the preposition of, which is basically supposed to be a schwa sound. It's almost always pronounced as a schwa. It's just a little sound. And if I want to clearly enunciate that word I'm naturally going to open my mouth a little bit more. I'm going to go a little bit lower into that position for the upside down V. So what you're hearing when you hear a difference between the schwa, the upside down E, and this upside down V IPA symbol is you're hearing two slightly different qualities of the same sound. These are actually 2 points in the full range of one sound. Now, what's the opposite end of the range? Well, that would be a dropped sound, right? In some cases, like another, that first syllable is It's an actual real true schwa sound, the upside down E. But it's possible to kind of just drop that sound, especially informally, and say, "Nother. Give me another beer. Give me another beer. Another beer." So that schwa might possibly be able to drop, especially in faster speech. So again, notice we're increasing the speed, we're increasing the laziness, or we're lowering the clarity, the clearness, and the enunciation of the sound to the point where it might completely drop, and it just actually disappears. So sometimes this might lead to a syllabic consonant, sometimes it might just disappear and the next syllable starts. But again, we see this full range of one sound. In other words, this upside down V IPA symbol is actually just the fully enunciated, very clearly pronounced version of what we call the schwa sound in American English. Now, it's for this reason that I simply refer to both of these symbols as the schwa. Now, what about reductions? Okay, don't get this confused with reductions, because if we say very quickly or very lazily or both, then it's going to naturally move into a actual schwa position where it's more closed, a little more relaxed, faster, But what happens if, for example, we reduce the article a to or the article the to the? This is a special use of the schwa where we are reducing whatever vowel sound to this sort of neutral middle sound. But this is a special use of the sound, okay? A nice, short, fast sound. The vowel, for example, is also used in a special reduction way. So, for example, the word or is usually, most of the time, reduced to If you don't have a special reason to emphasize this or that, you just say this or that, this or. So there's the really super relaxed, reduced, true schwa sound, which would be like And again, at least for an American or for an English speaker, it is super, super relaxed. It's not necessarily going to feel relaxed for your language based on how you hold your mouth. But that is what a lot of teachers talk about. Now, there's two other steps here to consider. The first step is what I would say is sort of a clearly produced true schwa sound, and that would be and that is what we're focusing on here as the center of gravity. Now that goes even farther down in American English to that upside down VIPA symbol, and that's pronounced as which is actually kind of hard for me to do in isolation on command, because for this exact reason that I'm talking about, how it's perceived as the same sound basically. But the real secret between these two is that if you have that nice good center of gravity, a nice good clear true schwa sound, and then you hold that, but you just open the jaw more, that's all I'm doing. I'm not moving anything, I'm not changing anything, I'm holding that same point and just letting the jaw open more. And so it's the more open jaw with that schwa position that creates that new sound. The fact that the center of gravity and the mouth posture in American English is right here and down a little, this actually helps to explain why Americans perceive and all as the same sound through the flow of speech, even though technically and are two different sounds. So I don't want you to get confused by that.
Круто, всем барбер... Круто, всем барбер...
They have
qui a une éducation
Now it might be hard to notice because the differences are so small, but all of those were schwa sounds, yet they don't sound exactly the same. And this connects to another idea I've had a while about the quality of a sound in a particular language or dialect. Just because two languages have the same sound, they might even have the same IPA symbol, does not mean that they sound exactly the same. A little while ago, I received a comment pushing back against my lesson about the full range of the schwa sound. And I think this is fair, but I want to make a video specifically to address it. One, because other people might have the same type of criticisms. And number two, because those of you who don't have those criticisms and agree with the way that I teach this, can get a better understanding and better idea of what is actually going on here. So first, the comment says, at 517, you say that the upside down E and the upside down V are technically not the exact same sound, but they are actually the same sound. I think this sounds weird and contradicting because you use the same word sound for different things. And then he goes on to talk about the difference between a phone and a phoneme, which is unnecessarily technical. I don't think that it really, although it does apply here to be 100% technically accurate, it's not actually relevant in practical terms. And that's what I'm always trying to give you guys is what is the real practical reality, not the technical hair splitting. I'm going to largely ignore that whole phoneme thing, but the first thing I want to address here is I think there was a little bit of a misunderstanding with my intention. So in the video I said there are really two different qualities of the same sound. And the thing that I wanted to emphasize there was that there is the range. And again, this is specific to American English, and this is focusing again on the practical reality, not the technical specific details. While editing, I remembered one very important detail, which is that, as I've mentioned before, the perception within American English that natives have of this upside down E and the upside down V is that they're essentially the same. And I've talked to multiple native speakers about this. And again, because it's a range, it can actually come out anywhere within that range between There are other teachers who will even tell you that these two are essentially the same sound. And that's partially because the perception of natives in American English, I'm not talking British English, I'm not talking other languages, these two are essentially the same sound. And my theory is that there are 2 points on the range of one full sound. The next part of this comment says, at 539, you say that the first vowel of the word other is pronounced with an upside down V, but becomes an upside down E, the schwa sound, when the word is pronounced quickly. However, I still hear an upside down V sound that is clearly different from the schwa at the end of the word. Now, this doesn't make any sense to me because the end of the word other does not have a schwa sound. It doesn't have the upside down V, it doesn't have the upside down E. If you go and you look at the dictionary, it will tell you that it's an upside down E plus R. It's like an R colored schwa. And I've mentioned this a bit before, you can completely ignore that, even if there are speakers who technically color their schwa. It's just an sound. It's just the vowel. That's it. Other. We're focused again on that practical reality. So the next point here, he says at 628, you say that of is not a reduction of, and explain that when the upside down E, the schwa, is pronounced more clearly, it becomes the upside down V. However, I don't see why this shouldn't be a reduction. Now, that's not necessarily quite what I said. I was going to come back to reductions later. So when it comes to words that are naturally pronounced, either just with the upside down E or the upside down V, if you go to the dictionary, it says upside down E or upside down V, then the more clearly you pronounce that particular word, like the word of, the more it's going to get closer to that upside down V. The faster and more lazily you pronounce it, which of is usually pronounced really fast and lazy, we tend to even drop the V most of the time, it's going to get a lot closer to that true schwa, the upside down E. And so again, that's just the range. So you can look at it as a reduction if you want, but I don't think that's useful because, again, the way I'm looking at this and the way I'm teaching this, they're actually sort of 2 points on the full range of one sound, essentially, in the context of American English. And so it's not actually a reduction, it's just going to a different point in the range of that sound. Now, lastly, this person says at 828, you say that is actually just the fully enunciated, very clearly pronounced version of what we call the schwa sound in American English. I disagree because you cannot generally use the upside down V to replace a schwa when fully enunciating a word. For example, the unstressed article A is pronounced but the stressed form is A. This is because the schwa can be a reduced form of different vowels. Okay, now this also I think is a bit of a misunderstanding, and I don't know if the person completely watched the video here, because later on, after about 9 minutes or so, I did talk specifically about reductions in relation to the schwa. But that doesn't mean that it can't come out with more of this upside down V sound. I see a man. Now we know that singing is a little bit different. It's not the best for pronunciation, but this is to illustrate what I'm talking about, and this can happen in speech, so it's not just singing. And even the, which we know the full pronunciation of the word the is the, right? So you're supposed to, if you emphasize it, stress it, you say it more clearly, you're supposed to unreduce it and say the, and she doesn't do that. She goes all the way down to the, instead of the. So this is just a very clear, natural example of an American English speaker doing exactly what I'm talking about. In real speech, it's not as likely that we're going to go all the way down to the upside down V when we reduce something to a schwa. It's actually quite unlikely, but it can happen. Make sure that you watch until the end of this lesson, because I'm going to give you ways that you can actually apply what you will learn in this lesson to improve your own English. There are two main things which make it difficult to understand fast natural speech. One is the connections between words, often called linking. The second thing is reductions. Reductions are a big, important, and common part of natural speech, and they help to create the rhythm of English. But what exactly is a reduction? A reduction is when you either remove a sound from a word, or when a sound in a word changes. For example, to usually is pronounced ta, and is usually pronounced n, just an n sound, and him is often pronounced im or so the h will disappear and the vowel might change. In this lesson, we're going to focus mostly on the schwa sound, because that is one of the most common reductions. First, I want you to say this sentence. It doesn't matter if your pronunciation is good or bad, just say the sentence out loud, and then I will say the sentence so that you can compare. What do you want to do today? What do you want to do today? Now you'll notice that I actually said that quite different than what you would expect. In this sentence, we have wanna, which is a reduction of want and to combined. The T is disappearing, which is a connection rule, but notice we keep the from t, wanna. We also don't say today. We usually say today. So the to in today is t. Our next example, again, go ahead and say this sentence. Now listen to how I say it. I'm gonna see him tonight. I'm gonna see him tonight. Here, going to has a special reduction to gonna. So going turns into gun, and again, we keep that from t, we connect, and we have na, gonna. You'll also commonly hear people say, I'm gonna see, which is a little more informal, as well as I'ma see, which is very informal. Also notice in this sentence that him is being reduced to just im. The H is disappearing. We also have a connection, see yim, sounds sort of like a small little y or a y sound, see yim. In addition, we have tonight, not tonight, tonight. So we have the t, just like with the preposition to, but we're also changing the T to a D in American English, but that's more about connection rules, so we'll see more about that later. You were probably taught that wanna and gonna are informal, and they can be kind of informal, but they're more just a natural part of how we speak. It also depends on the situation, but wanna and gonna are the most common. The articles a and the also usually reduce to the schwa sound. For example, that's a good idea, that's a, or the apple is red, the apple, the apple. Note here, you were probably taught that if you have the word the, and then you have a vowel sound, you're supposed to say the apple is red. That is an older rule which is disappearing, at least in American English. It is not required to say that. Sometimes we will naturally say it because it is still part of the language, but it is perfectly acceptable as long as you speak clearly to say a schwa sound with the and then a vowel sound. The apple, the earth, the easy way. The word you also often reduces to a schwa sound with a y before it. This is especially common in questions. I don't know if you caught it or noticed this, but when I said, what do you want to do today? What do you wanna? So do as a helping verb, not as a main verb, here it's making the question, usually becomes duh. You, which is just a pronoun, usually becomes ya. So we get da ya. Reductions with the word you can be more informal, so this is a point you might want to be careful with, but this is usually more extreme reductions, like instead of saying, what are you doing? We can say, whatcha. That is more informal. Now, although there are some reductions that can be informal, reductions themselves are not about formality. They're just part of speaking naturally, whether that's in formal speech or in informal speech. If you decide to enunciate or emphasize a word, then it is more likely that you will use the full pronunciation. And now it's time for a bonus reduction that uses the schwa. This is an advanced tip, and it deals with modal verbs plus have done, which would be the past tense of the modal. For example, would have done, could have done, should have done, might have done, etc. In this case, instead of saying have done, you can reduce have to woulda done, coulda done, shoulda done, mighta done. For example, I woulda done it if blah blah blah. Okay, so how do you apply this to your own English? There are two main ways. The first way is pronunciation analysis. The second way is shadowing, and these two actually work really well when you combine them together. I'm going to teach you how to do shadowing step by step a little bit later in this course. Welcome to the extra practice for the schwa sound. In this lesson, there are over 150 example words because we are including words that use either of these two symbols. Remember, it's the same sound and you just have to listen and repeat. Ready? The letter U spelling pattern. But, cut, shut, hut, gut, fun, bun, run, sun, hunt, runt, stunt, rub, cub, club, sub, hub, us, bus, bust, rust, dust, must, duck, luck, truck, buck, suck, trunk, drunk, chunk, up, cup, much, lunch, punch, dumb, thumb, crumb, stuff, bluff, cuff, rush, crush, fuzz, buzz, hug, hung, undo, uncle, ugly, bunny, funny, under, thunder, subscribe, 100, suppose, support, supply, puppy, number, public, Russia, result. Note that result is an L-colored schwa. We'll learn more about that in future lessons. The letter O spelling pattern. 1, done, none, some, come, from, money, honey, other, another, mother, brother, of, love, glove, month, anybody, somebody, someone, nothing, wonder, sun, does, monk, monkey, color, Europe, oven, cover, dozen, doesn't, Monday, Sunday, above, polite, other letters, what, was, about, around, account, amount, the, to, 20, touch, cousin, couple, double, trouble, tough, rough, enough, pronunciation, Monica, America, India, China, Africa, generous, ambitious, enormous. Note that many words spelled O-U-S at the end can either be pronounced with the second vowel I or with a schwa. You can choose whichever is easier. Advanced and uncommon examples: luxury, asunder, align, ominous, jealous, husk, musk, dusk, tusk, muck, hunk, punk, sunk, dunk, munch, hunch, lush, hush, chunky, custody, mustard, fluster, knuckle, chuckle, debunk, rupture, interrupt, corrupt, humble, mumble, publish, shove, compass, compassion, govern, southern,